So thank you everyone for joining our session today. It's great to be in front of the Databricks community. I am Naveen Punjabi. I lead our analytics and AI partnerships at Google Cloud. And before we get started, I wanted you all to think about the number of applications you have interacted with today already, whether it's Gmail, Calendar, Slack, Teams, Salesforce, maybe even Workday. And if you think about it, there are even hundreds of applications within your companies, maybe even thousands. And each of these applications are a treasure trove of data. And so far, for most part, this data has been sitting in silos. Now, as we speak, and you've heard a lot about it already, each of these applications are becoming agentic, which means agents are being deployed and are being built on top of this application data, connecting to LLMs for prompt and reasoning, connecting to the tools to take actions, and each of these agents have their own memory space, if you will. So we are going from a world of data silos to AI silos, as I call it, and it's a challenge. And this is where I think this talk comes into play, where we said, okay, how do we think about making these agents that are being built interoperate with each other, collaborate with each other? So Google Cloud developed an open source to the community agent-to-agent protocol, A2A. And the idea here is to provide a framework for agents to collaborate with each other. And we open sourced it, but the community is what makes it stronger. And we've been partnering with 50 plus companies, including SAP, Glean, Confluent. Microsoft is a part of it as well. And Databricks is working with us on this one too. So with that, I think we're truly excited to have data and AI leaders from SAP, Glean, as well as Confluent on the stage here to walk us through what A2A is, how it's solving the challenges, and where we see the future going from here. With that, maybe it's good to get a quick round of intros from all stakeholders on the stage here. Sean, why don't you start from your end, and then we go to Shiva and Kix.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Faulkner, and I lead Confluent's AI product strategy. I've been working in the sort of intersection of data, AI, knowledge engineering for my entire career across a variety of different companies, including Google. But excited to be here and excited to talk about agents and also agent-to-agent.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Siva. I'm part of SAP's platform architecture team. I actually lead the platform architecture. For those of you who don't know about SAP is one of the leading applications provider for enterprises. So almost 70% of the world's transactions go to SAP every single day. And my responsibility is to support the platform that the applications runs on. So that includes data, AI, application development, and integration. Yeah.
Cool. My name is Matt Kixmoeller. I'm the CMO at Glean. For those of you who don't know Glean, we're an enterprise AI platform. And we really try to solve the problem that the AI tools out there don't know a whole lot about your company. And so if you think about your company, there's data, there's people, there's processes, and unless AI understands those things, it's hard for it to do useful work in the context of the company. So we go out and index all the information in the company, but build a knowledge graph that connects the data, the people, and the processes, and then make that useful for AI. And on our platform, we deploy an assistant experience where a lot of people type stuff in and want work to be done. And oftentimes that work needs to be done by agents, and we need ways to find those agents, and so A2A is awesome for that. We are also a platform where people can build agents, and those agents can't do everything on their own and often have to tag in other agents to get work done, and so you can imagine A2A is perfect for that as well.
Thank you all, and we truly appreciate the work that you've been doing with Google Cloud on the AI frontier as well as on A2A. So with that, I have a few questions to steer the discussion here. Maybe the first one, from your vantage point, what are the challenges that you see today with the AI silos, as I defined it, that is being created, and how do you see A2A coming into play as we go? Maybe Sean, start from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a big thing that we're seeing in the industry really over the last 6 months or so is companies have been moving beyond essentially science experiments to putting things into production. And I think one of the good signs about the maturity of the market is that we are starting to develop these standards like agent-to-agent, MCP, other standardizations that help fix some of the potential problems as people start to put these things into production and start to scale. So if we all believe in this future around AI agents, companies are going to have potentially hundreds or thousands of these different agents. built separately, running in different applications, whether it's SAP, Glean, or you're building them yourself on your data stream in Confluent, or you're building them using other types of frameworks and so forth, you're going to end up with essentially these intelligence silos like you were talking about, where you have an island of agents rather than essentially a mesh of agents. And that really is going to start to cause a lot of problems, just like the problems that we've had around data silos historically. We've been trying to fix that problem for 30, 40 years, and we haven't quite fixed it yet. But I think the fact that we have that history of struggle against data silos, we're kind of starting out from a good place with this emerging future around AI agents of trying to tackle this problem of intercommunication from almost day one.
Yeah, maybe I'll explain with a simple example. Let's take supply chain, right? The nature of the business is that you got to work with a lot of different parties and companies. You have to work with your supplier, your freight forwarders, shipping agents, and if you're not managing your own inventory, you got to work with a drop shipper too. So when you have so many different parties involved and you want to really address a customer problem, right? Or when you go into your AI agent and ask like, where is my purchase order right now? The system that you're asking may not have all the information to be even able to answer it. So you got to reach out to a lot of these different systems that may or may not exist in your own enterprises, right? So this is where A2A really comes in handy. It standardizes the communication, not only between the agents inside your company, but across your partners and your ecosystem as well. So it helps you to define what it can do, cannot do. At the same time, it also helps you to identify and then authenticate. But at the same time, if you're on the receiving end of that, right? So if you are the one that's providing the information, then you also be able to put a boundary around it and say, hey, this is what I can provide and I'm allowed to provide to you, and also lets you to kind of engage with your ecosystem in a meaningful way. So in short, operating in silo is not an option, but having this kind of standardization really helps you to improve the experience of your users and customers.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Kix, from your perspective.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think it's a really exciting time in the enterprise software market. If you look at a decade ago or so, most departments or companies would have a major system of record application for departments. So they would have CRM for sales, and they would have a support system for their support group, and SAP for operations, et cetera. And those solutions were systems of record where people kept data, and they were also systems of action where people built workflows and business processes. And that was kind of the default motion, that if I wanted to get a business process done in one of these departments, I probably should build it on that application, and it kind of grew from there. I see now in the agentic world, there's a new explosion of just kind of openness to new vendors, new solutions, new ways to build things, where I think most customers are still pretty interested in keeping those systems of record because they run their business on them and they're important for having a reliable ledger and all these things that are necessary. But there's just a lot of vendors coming in with cool agent technologies, and I think we're going to see a proliferation of agent ecosystems around all these applications, let alone agents that kind of tie them together. And so if the average enterprise before might have run dozens or hundreds of SaaS applications, I think we're going to see a world where there's tens or hundreds of thousands of agents that'll be inside companies. And so, yeah, that just brings up all kinds of interesting challenges around how all these agents work together, how you find what's out there if you want to get something done, how you even discover these agents, let alone authenticate to them and manage them and all these things. So a protocol like A2A really is perfect, and I think that it's been super fun watching. I think of A2A and MCP as kind of parallel protocols or brothers, and MCP obviously for tool calling. It's been amazing to see how quickly that's been adopted, and vendors have gotten on board just because they realize that the need for this interoperability is there. And I think we're a little bit, a couple clicks behind on agents, but as agents grow, that exact same need for interop will, I think, really power the adoption of A2A as well.
Yeah, just one thing to add there. I think too, you need the ecosystem support for any of this stuff to take off anyway. Like if you could design the best open standard in the world, the best protocol, but if no one uses it, it's like being on a social network by yourself. It's kind of a lonely place. So the fact that all the major players in the market have been sort of standing behind these open standards, and rather than fighting over who controls it, I think is really, really valuable for the industry as a whole, that as we continue to build and evolve the agents and the models and everything.
For sure.
From our perspective, what was fascinating to see was when we announced the agent-to-agent protocol, contributed to the community picked it up and came out with the framework of this is how we think about A2A working with MCP, and it became like very quickly out there that people get it, and that's a need in the market. So it was fascinating. For everybody, just to frame the reference, the way A2A works is it defines a framework, a common way for agents to communicate with each other with HTTPS, RPC, and it also defines a framework called agent cards, where agents can say, identify themselves, which allows agents to discover agents. It also allows agents to say what tasks they can do, whether they can be the client or the server for a specific task. So nice little framework that is now being standardized across the board. From challenges going to opportunities, how do you see the business use cases getting impacted with A2A? You're probably already having these discussions with customers already. How is that playing out in the market?
Yeah, I mean, from a Confluent perspective, one of the very common use cases that we see is, so if you're not familiar with Confluent, we're sort of known for data streaming. We were the original creators of the founders of Confluent were the originally creators of the Apache Kafka project. And now we do essentially not just Kafka, but an entire platform around data streaming, so stream processing, governance, and so forth. But a lot of our use cases center around things that are very much in the moment. You know, I have clickstream data, someone's interacting on a website, and I want to be able to create some sort of personalized engagement with that person. Or maybe they have an item that's in a cart and they haven't purchased that in 20 minutes, and I can tell that essentially using complex event processing. And then I want to use that as a signal, essentially a real-time signal to kick off an agent. But the agent that exists that's running essentially as part of the stream processor realistically needs to also potentially talk to other parts of the system that know more about the customer than you might have essentially within the operational state of the business. I need to maybe talk to my lakehouse, for example, and the agents that I'm running there using Mosaic AI, because they have a deeper understanding of customer engagement, the profile of customers, and can essentially take that signal information and do something that's deeper with it and then communicate back. So there's a lot of this handoff that starts to form as you start to actually build out some of these real world use cases. And I think really that is the future that we're moving towards, is we can create these highly, deeply personalized engagements with customers, but that requires tapping into lots of different data systems that will surface through these agentic experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a real use case that we just built for a customer. So this is a manufacturing customer based in East Coast. They focus on manufacturing all the flooring products, and they just sell it via the retailer. One of the common complaints that they have been receiving was that the packages get damaged, so the retailers would just file for a claim, right? So what actually was happening on the manufacturer side was they were just looking at the claim, looking at all the information that were submitted by the retailers, go into the system, kind of look at if they're right, and then they go look at the order information, they look at all the other information to kind of figure out whether the claim can be processed the right way or not. So what we were able to do was we were able to build an agent that actually kind of brings all of these elements together to be able to solve the problem. So for example, when the claim comes in, they go look up the knowledge base and see how should that claim be processed, because there is a clear policy that actually outlines how some of these claims are supposed to be processed. So once it has an understanding of how it actually processes or should be processed, then it goes, looks at the system, then it looks at verifies the data provided by the retailer, then actually looks at the invoice information, looks at the shipping information. If all of this is correct, then it actually goes and reaches out to the third-party freight forwarder information to see whether it was damaged in the shipping. And if it actually was damaged, then it actually verifies again the policy and see if it can automatically create a replacement order for that particular retailer. This would have taken an entry-level claims analyst, like probably a couple of hours to kind of get everything verified and processed. But the agent was able to kind of go across all these systems seamlessly, but not to forget the glue between all of these agents were like the A2A to kind of make sure the understanding and the communication was seamless. So it kind of opens up a lot of these newer use cases and workflows that would have been very rigid in the past, where you cannot just define it in a policy document and ask it to process, but have to hand build it via API. That's a possibility now that we are looking at, right? So it's a lot of new use cases that you can think of are possible right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and it's indicative of the fact that I think these new agent applications, if you call them that, now can really span across many different parts of the business. And I think one of the things we've learned working with customers as they start to build more and more complex agents is that you get more deterministic results if you can basically boil down the agent steps to be as discrete as possible. Because if you think about each step in the agent, you have to be able to kind of reason about its completeness, write evals for it, be able to test its output. And so you kind of want to know that each step is discrete. The follow-on to that is you kind of want whatever agent platform is best equipped to do that step to do it. And so if you're building an agent in one platform, but it turns out this is really best done in the sales platform, wouldn't it be better to try to call out to an agent in the sales platform and get that piece of discrete work done and come back to your overall flow, as opposed to trying to orchestrate that within the centralized application? So I think you'll see a lot more architectures where basic capabilities are agentized across all the different systems in the business, and then flows will basically spawn across them.
Yeah, it's really about the aggregation of these sort of purpose-built agents that work together to solve complex problems, rather than one agent to rule them all.
Exactly.
The monolith
That's right.
agent.
Yeah. No, I think we see that the world the same way as well. Another interesting question that comes to mind, A2A is a great framework for agents to talk to each other, communicate, interoperate. What are the other things the audience should be keeping in mind so that we're able to solve the problems beyond just interoperability, like real-time communication, having common semantics, knowledge graph, all of that governance comes into play? So I would love maybe kickstart from your end.
Yeah, I think one that is very top of mind for us is all around security and permissions. One of the things that Glean kind of realized from day one, we do a lot of indexing of all the data in an organization, and you need to be able to really understand exactly whose permissions exist on every underlying data source. So if you go and type a query in or do an agentic flow, the user of that is only working on and seeing the data that they're authenticated to or have access to. So that's great and all, but when you think about an agent, then it opens up broader questions around, well, what is this agent? Is it a proxy for the person? Does it have the permissions of the person who called it? Does it have its own identity that's independent? If I'm a requester and I request into an agent in a completely different application, and am I doing so as Matt, or am I doing so as the marketing department who wants something done? And so I think the framework for basically how we not only authenticate between agents, but essentially identify our identity, and that's kind of passed through, and then that can be acted on by that agent, is a critical piece of the security puzzle, and one that I think is just being worked on right now.
Yeah. We see three things. One, let's say you are a consumer of agents that are provided by the other vendors. We see a need for what we call as an agent catalog or a registry, where you have a curated set of agents that you are allowed to access, so that the agents don't go rogue and then just reach out to everything that's available. So that's one thing that we think that you may want to think about. And then there need to be a standardized representation of the metadata of the agents as well, right? The agent card is there, which exposes what it can, the capabilities and everything. But the whole metadata, we think something like an ORD would really help you to kind of capture all of the information and then catalog it, so that when you ask a question, your agent can just go look at the catalog and reach out to all the other agents. The second one is very similar to what Kix talked about, which is the identity propagation. If you are not the system where the questions originated, if it is coming from somewhere else, then you should be able to map the user so that you are allowed to see or allowed to access only whatever information that is restricted to you, right? Especially it's very important in our systems like finance system, where it's really important to restrict the information to only the people who are allowed to access. So identity propagation from whichever agents that are there, that has to be carefully maintained. The last one is, if you are the provider of information, then you have to think about something like an agent gateway, where when all the different agents are trying to access yours, and a centralized gateway would really be helpful in kind of centralizing the identity and authentication, and also kind of like a little bit like if it is A2A or MCP, or like even to kind of logging and auditing and all of those reasons as well. So these are the three things that you may want to think about when you are building a system that would be more agentic.
Yeah, I think from my perspective with talking to a lot of our customers and being in this space for a long time, there's a few different challenges I see people run into. One is that the nice thing about if you're building agents, the multi-agent system architecture, is it gives you kind of a natural way to think about decomposition. And as we were mentioning earlier, you really want to ideally make your agents as purpose-built as possible, because it makes the testing and iterating a lot easier. And also you want to essentially have as much determinism over this inherently non-deterministic process as possible. So if you understand what the graph structure of how the multi-agent system should work, you should essentially just hard code the graph structure. Don't leave it up to a stochastic model to make the decision. Or if essentially I hear all the time people ask, hey, I want to call this tool, and how do I make it sure that the LLM always calls the tool? And my advice is just call the tool. Don't leave it up to the LLM to make the decision to call the tool. So you have to think through these types of things, and it's kind of a new way of programming. It's a little bit different because you have to take into account that this thing is inherently stochastic and sometimes makes mistakes.
Yeah, I think we're learning to lean into that and how much to trust that or not, right?
Yeah, exactly.
On one hand, you had the RPA world where maybe it was too fragile and you had to code everything, and that just was limited. So the hope here is that we can let the LLM reason a little bit more and not have to kind of give it complete rails. But today, I think there's a lot of work to give it as much determinism as possible.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see how it evolves if we can learn to trust it more and if the technology grows. Or
yeah, and I find like in enterprise customers, they're looking for where their wins can be, and I think a lot of the wins come from things that are a little bit more like replacing an existing human-driven process that follows some sort of playbook today, which is going to be a little bit more workflowy in nature. It's just easier to get to a place where you can have a reliable system that you can deploy in production. The other big factors are, the other thing is around replayability, where when you're building agents is very an iterative process where you're creating different prompts, you're testing those things, maybe you're introducing different tools, you have different versions of these things, and you have to really be thinking about how do I actually keep track of all the interactions? Because one of the places where agents can kind of run into problems during the development standpoint is sometimes they do make mistakes, and if you're using some sort of framework that works out of the box, great, but then when it makes a mistake and it's hard for you to trace where that mistake happens, that's where you start to run into some of these challenges. So you have to be thinking about that from the beginning of how am I actually logging every tool call, every interaction with an agent, so that I know exactly what's happening when things go awry. And then I should be able to replay those event sequences against new versions of those agents and without potentially consequential side effects. And then the last thing is, from a deployment standpoint, agents really, when you're deploying them, they're no more than a microservice with a brain. So the same way that we've been able to build and scale large-scale microservices over the past decade plus when we broke up the monolith, we have to be applying those same sort of architectural patterns when we're building and deploying multi-agent systems as well, where most scalable microservices run through event-driven architecture, where you're, instead of using request-response models and point-to-point connections, where you run into a lot of brittleness as those things scale, you have to be thinking of the way that we scale those systems through event-driven architecture, loose coupling, those same systems, that same architectural pattern essentially applies to multi-agent systems as well.
Yeah, I mean, Sean touched upon this, like even in design time, when you are designing the agent, a lot of these considerations about what to pick and when to use this have to be also have to be curated well ahead of time so that your developers and your engineers actually know what are all the permitted agents within your department and your organization. Because then if the information leaks out from your financial system, you'll have much more consequences. So it kind of makes sense to have this consideration during the design time and not leave it to the runtime of the agents too.
Yeah, well, that's a fascinating thing. I mean, a lot for us to think about in terms of what to do right to get this working. we talked a lot about agents being built on applications, but many of us are here at the Databricks event. Everybody here is likely invested into the lakehouse architecture, how they're bringing all the data together into a lakehouse and enabling it. When we think about agents being built and communication, how should everybody think about lakehouse as a paradigm? What should be done within a lakehouse? What should be outside? How do you think about that?
Yeah, maybe
Go for it.
I'll start. So, I mean, data is obviously a key pillar for grounding, and when you look at a complex system like SAP's, we have like 100,000 tables, right? Having an API layer that just fires a SQL statement would not cut it. So what has to be done is a hand-picked, curated set of data that is reliable and consistent is very important for you to be able to kind of augment your agentic work, and that's where the lakehouse architecture really comes in handy. And then the data products that, for example, SAP provides and exposes it would really make sure that when somebody is asking for sales information, you're actually getting the sales information. You're not including the returns, you're not including the damaged and in transit and all of that, right? So the reliability of the data really, really goes up. The second thing is, along with the reliability, it's also the consistency, right? When you have a multi-agent system running on top that can verify your data much more accurately and cross-verify as well, so you can be very sure that you are actually getting more trusted data than a wrong query that just picked up some data from your database system. Also, the row-based authentication when you're accessing everything via Unity catalog, the row-based authentication system or row-level authentication system or access is really, really important so that a sales rep that's responsible for territory A don't get to see his counterpart's data which he is managing in a different territory. So the data becomes a central part in the grounding, but it just augments everything that you would build on top of the agents.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, look, I think it's a really exciting time in these different data platform evolution. And I think if you look at where Glean came from things, we came from the opposite side, which was just the mass of unstructured data in all the applications and emails and Slacks and everything sitting around your organization. And we've started to add support. We have an integration with Databricks, for example, so that you can do a live query into Databricks. And it opens up very interesting use cases to bridge these two worlds. I think, for example, of like, let's say a CEO who wants to know how his quarter is going. Maybe we're behind on the quarter, right? You can do a query, or you can ask that question. It'll be translated into a query that might be executed in the lakehouse. And you can get the actual sales information. You can get the numbers. You can see how many leads we have. You can have all that kind of stuff. But you wouldn't get the color, right? You wouldn't get, for example, that we had a QBR and the sales managers were talking about some stuff, and in a certain region we had an issue with a customer and all these other things. And so there's an interesting opportunity here, I think, to bring together these two worlds of the fairly well-curated set of data where you want to get the reliable numbers, the sales forecast, the things that kind of you want to rely on. But what else is out there that might inform this decision and bring intelligence to this broader discussion we're having around this data is a new world that just didn't exist before. And so that's an example of an agent we've built that is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with the points made. I think that fundamentally, like all AI problems are really data problems. And doesn't matter how powerful a model you have, if you're slapping that on top of a garbage heap of data, it's probably not going to solve your problems. You're going to lead to, essentially hallucinations faster. But so you have to get essentially your data in order as a starting point, and that comes with liberating the data from lots of different places, well curating it, data modeling, like. AI models don't replace some of those fundamentals of essentially good data management. And then also I think from an agentic standpoint, agents really have a really like hard requirement around not only historical references, but also sort of data that's in the moment. So, Kix was mentioning with Glean agents, they can reach into the world of the lakehouse for that historical reference. But then they also have sort of that in-the-moment business data of things that are happening in Slack. That's also a very similar pattern that what we see with Confluent, where we're often sort of the source of truth as far left as possible in the app stack, where your mobile app is sending data. You need that real-time signal information to inform decision-making, just like humans have that, where senses in the moment, but we also have her historical reference of how we perform certain tasks in the past. So you need both of those worlds to come together in this kind of old world thinking of, hey, we have our data on the left that's generated by our ops, we heave it over a fence, land it in the lakehouse, the data team deals with that, and never will the two worlds meet. That is not essentially a future that can exist in the world of agentic AI. You have to bring those two worlds together.
Nice. That's very, very thoughtful. Looking ahead, maybe a few years out, multi-agent systems will be a reality. And when you think about it, there is work that is happening today with customers that we are all doing. What are the use cases that you think will get unlocked, which will be truly out of the possible? Would love your perspective on that. And second one for the audience here, how do the role of data engineers, data analysts, data scientists evolve with that? So that'll be very helpful to know as to how we see things ahead. Maybe Sean, from your side.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in terms of future, the future that we're driving towards is really like deep personalization. And we've been seeing that with every new innovation that's happened in technology. Like if you were old enough to remember the early days of the internet and you went to a website and you had your Internet Explorer, you could click through for the Internet Explorer experience or the Netscape experience. And that was like as impersonal as possible. And then we got better at, we could recognize what the browser is, we could adapt it. And we've slowly gotten better at personalization. We see a lot of personalization in the world of advertising, but it's not like my Slack automatically transforms based on learning who I am. And that would be fantastic if it did. But I think that's where we'll get. And I think the foundation models essentially allow that to happen. Like even the way that I learn now is much more personal. Whereas when I was in graduate school and I wanted to learn a new thing, I would perhaps read the title and abstract of a research paper, and then if I wanted to dive into it, I would read it cover to cover and spend a lot of time thinking about it. And now I can do essentially that curation at the beginning of looking at the title and the abstract, but then I can throw it into essentially a model and start asking questions and dive into it that way. So it makes it a personal way of essentially learning about new things. And historically, most education has been sort of one size fits all, and I think that's going to change because essentially now you can essentially choose your own adventure, but that doesn't just apply to education, it's going to apply essentially to all consumer experiences with any of these types of applications. It can essentially be curated to how you need to interact with it based on how it learns about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as data engineers and data analysts, I think the way you explore and analyze the data, I think might change and evolve in the next couple of months and years. Today, most of the work is about answering the what question. What is my sales? What is my total inventory and so on? But I see that answering questions like how would start to come up and rely more on the data as well. Let me give you an example. So if you are if a new accountant joining a company wants to know how an utility bill has to be accounted in the system, right? So he or she is going to just ask the system, how should it be accounted for? What kind of account type should I use? What kind of cost center should I pick for my department, right? But all of this data is still available in the historical data structure that you already have in your lake house, right? Why can't you just go mine that information and then just tell this is the account type for your department and your division, and this is the cost center that you got to use. So these are the information that typically locked up in kind of some training document and policy document. I see some evolution of how coming into the lakehouse, and you may want to think about not just like providing, answers for what questions, but also how questions. This means that not just writing queries, but rather writing flexible agents that actually generate code and that runs closer to the data that be able to answer these questions. So this is something that I think would slowly evolve in the next couple of months.
Yeah, just to build on that idea, I think the other evolution that will happen with that is less of these like prompt-based agentic experiences, where it's more of a continuous thing that's embedded in infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So today, maybe it's prompt-based because there's some concern over token costs and performance and things like that. But if I can have essentially an analyst that's running against my lakehouse 24/7, that's asking these questions proactively, surface it.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah. I hope I didn't steal your...
No, not at all, not at all. I'll take it a slightly different direction. Yeah. I think one of the things we're excited about is more of the long tail of agent creation. We're working hard to figure out how you can kind of get agent creation in the hands of everyone. And I think a lot of people, when they start to look at where am I going to build agents, they think about, all right, what are the important things in my company? What are the key business processes? Or what are the things that are done in a very bulk way? I've got hundreds of sales reps. What do they do every day? I've got hundreds of support people. What do they do every day? But when you look across your company, you might have thousands of people that actually have pretty darn unique jobs, and they don't do kind of the same thing at all. I know I have a 50-person marketing team, and there aren't that many people on my team that actually do the same thing. And so think about trying to bring agents to make my team more efficient. Well, everyone on that team has to figure out what they do and encode that into agents. And so it becomes a very personal thing. And the more you can kind of put that out to the leaf nodes of the organization, where people can think about their own internal work and start to bring agents to bear, yes, you're making them more productive, but what you're also doing is capturing the business process of the organization that those people defined and today execute and are now training into agents. Right, and so you talked earlier about that notion of the difficulty of building them. I think also you're going to see these agents much more auto-created, and so these people are not going to hand code these agents. They're going to describe what they want, and we're going to observe how they work and kind of help them build agents by observing the ways they work and encoding that into agentic flows. One of the things I love the comment about the personalization, where today we have this knowledge graph of the organization. We understand a lot about data and who works on data with whom. We're starting to now build what we call a personal graph, which takes that down to an individual personal level, where we understand everybody in the organization, what are they doing, how are they working, and the more you understand what people actually do and how they work, the better you can auto-generate agents for them that kind of mirror that level of working. And look, it's not always about exactly working the way a person is. Sometimes you want to unlock new ways of working, but it's a good first start of understanding what are the things these people do and how can I bring agents to bear that can help do that. And then bringing that way back to the A2A conversation, all these thousands of people building their own agents, I mean, the spawn of the amount of agents in an organization just gets huge. And so today it's already hard enough to figure out in a company, like, who's the person that does this thing? How do I find the expert on this topic? Now each of those people has a bunch of agents. How do I tap into the agent they've trained to do this thing? So that discovery really matters.
And if you have the systems where essentially anybody can build an agent through just natural language expressions, you'll have agents that are building agents as well, to sort of ephemeral agents, so very task-oriented. It's
great
inception.
Yeah, it's fascinating and a lot to look forward to in terms of driving business value as well as productivity gains. We could talk here for hours on this topic, but I think we're running out of time in some sense. Quickly, I think we have 3 minutes left. It'll be good to get each one of your perspectives. We talked a lot about do's, what we need to be thinking about. Any don'ts? No, don't do X, Y, Z for the audience. Maybe Sean?
I think one of my don'ts, I guess, is I see two problems a lot of times with customers I talk to. One side is that they're almost like paralyzed with the number of things that they could do. So they basically can't make any forward action because there's just so many things and they're looking for the killer use case. And realistically, you just need to get started. You need to start doing some stuff. But then on the flip side of that, I also talk to customers that have like 300 POCs and there's no coordinated effort, no vision or goal in mind. They're just like, we need to step on the gas, we gotta have an AI strategy, but that's not a strategy, that's a disaster. So you don't wanna be on either sides of those extremes. You really need to take, I think, more of a sort of a traditional product lens on this, where you pick a handful of projects. Ideally, you're balancing sort of high ROI, low effort, things that you can have some confidence that you can actually deliver, and you need to get focus on those things and hopefully deliver those and have some success, and then build from there.
Yeah. My don't would be, don't take security for granted, right? So because it's going to be very, very important, especially when you're working with that transactional system that has financial data. So you got to have that baked in right from the beginning and not as an afterthought, right? So everything like around the principal propagation and the row level authentication or access control is very going to be important. So don't miss that out.
I guess my don't, I'll harken back to an earlier part of our conversation, is don't forget the evals. I see a lot of people thinking a lot about what could be. If I could make this agent, it could do this thing. If this can happen, this can happen. and not enough thinking about how they'll actually reason through how I will grade that agent and judge that agent. And I still think it's early days in this. Many systems are still kind of like thumbs up, thumbs down, or some basic test cases. So I think there's a lot of work industry-wide to be done to figure out how you capture these evals and auto-write them and grade things and give feedback. And depending on the kind of agent, you really want users to be able to give verbal feedback and improve the agent automatically and things like that. So I think it's early days, but it starts with actually just writing them down and being like, if I was grading this agent like a human, like how would I actually grade their output and what does good look like and what is that bar? And I feel like not enough thought is put there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. This was really, really fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.